Humankind is fixing one of
However,
its
on a small
systems that
town
has
farm,
split the
another
community
day,
since release
another
and
dawn
getting
of
spicy
humankind.
with its
It's
own
time to finish
warfare
breakfast,
in the
give a rousing
upcoming
speech, and
Bolivar
leap into the
update,
future.
where things like war support and surrender are being given a complete overhaul. And for the most part, I'm pretty excited about the changes, so let me unpack and
If you learn
discuss them
nothing
today,
else,
while first
could learn
mentioning
what
that we
you're
are so close to 20,000 subscribers. That even a
Cool,
real
that
number?
is.
I'm not sure. In this gameplay, you're going to see me do some warfare of my own and discuss the changes. And also, just quickly, I would note that I'll be live streaming to celebrate, hopefully crossing over 20,000 subscribers in around 17 hours, maybe 10 hours after this is uploaded. War support and surrender in the Bolivar update are the key focus points. The first most noticeable change that they're putting right up front for this update in terms of war support will be voluntary surrender. If you're unfamiliar, at the moment in Humankind, you can be forced to surrender a war where you are the aggressor
building an outpost
by
and claiming
wearing down
territory,
the opponent's
this
war
easy.
score
The
to
trick, of
0
course,
by
is keeping
capturing
it.
cities and successfully defeating them in fights, regardless of how many units are involved. It could be a 1v1 scout fight or a 20v20 naval combat, it doesn't matter. You earn war support or lose war support if you lose, and then once somebody drops to 0, they are forced to surrender. The difficulty here as well is that in the existing version of Humankind, when you're forced to surrender, sometimes you can be in a really advantageous spot. Like you've taken out 5 cities of an opponent, they've got 1 left, you're just about to destroy it, and then their war support happens to tick down from an arbitrary 3 to a 0, and you're forced to end the war and then wait more turns to build up a little bit more passive war score by bickering with them in the diplomacy menu or whatever to fight them again, and then hopefully get enough war score to be able to take their city. This update will remove that penalty with some extra changes that I'll discuss more later around stability, effectively loyalty
As
almost.
far as markets go,
Next up, the war support
we know
change
the Olmec
after a battle is
traded
now
their
based on the
marvelously crafted
losses
goods
on
of trade,
each side.
but we know
A
little
costly
more.
victory may earn you very little
This is
or
your story to
worse.
write.
This is super important and touches on something
It
that
is
I just
not
mentioned
just a
before,
bunch of buildings.
where a fight, a
It is
1v1
warmth,
scout was worth the same
protection,
as a
and, praise the
grand
gods,
battle,
a bit of privacy.
and your losses don't matter. Here you can see in a fight with no losses, we're getting 10 war support. The opponent, who lost all of their units, lost 10 war support. This is sort of how it should be, as we see war support start to reflect, perhaps, morale of troops. High morale and success leads to greater war support, and this will ultimately give you more bargaining chips on the table when it comes to drawing up the map after the war is over, right? That's fundamentally what the war support
Greetings to the
mechanic,
Nubians.
as it's
Now
denoted
there's
at the
some
moment
good
in
fortune.
Humankind, is meant to
Why
do.
was this
This
even
update,
requested?
therefore, is not only
Let's keep it
adding that
simple.
stability
We've been
element.
here. It's our place.
While your opponent is on 0, they're not forced to surrender. But if you don't end the war, you may start to suffer stability penalties. Now we also see that individual battles will affect our war score, using it not only as a stability and trying to sort of capture the sentiment of the population, but now also capturing, as we fast forward a little bit here to get towards my own war, the morale of your troops as well. However, the changes don't stop here. You see, they're also making 2 more adjustments to how victories are made in war support changes. Next up, ransacking enemy districts will now cost the enemy war support. On balance, this is a nice change, although I will have something to note about this later in the video. However, this is brilliant. Fundamentally, as you can see here on screen, we're gaining war support by destroying enemy improvements, etc. districts. This does make sense, although there may need to be a little bit of nuance here depending on the district and the place. Again, I'll cover that more later in the video, but fundamentally, this is a 180 from how it tends to work at the moment in Humankind, where you sort of build up their war support by burning down their districts. It sort of makes sense because they might want revenge, but it also sort of doesn't. It's difficult. Hopefully these changes will make that system better, acknowledging the wider changes as well. And finally, territories under your control, but under the enemy's cultural influence, will drain some of your war support each turn. So just to reiterate that, territories that I'm controlling, that I actively control, that are my cities, my outposts, my units are there, whatever, but they're under the enemy's cultural sphere of influence, will cost me war support. This makes sense if you think about how that might play out practically. If I've come into your land and taken it, but culturally all the people are still yours, then they won't fuel my war support. In fact, it'll work against me. That fundamentally makes sense. Of course, this again is another tricky point, just like that last point. How do you strike the right balance here? Go too far and it could become overwhelmingly strong, too weak and it doesn't do enough. It may also, interestingly, slightly shift the balance of the strength of aesthete cultures and militarist cultures, and perhaps even overall lift up the strengths of culture and influence generation in humankind, something that was previously really buffed in the last update, one that I still need to unpack a lot more live on stream here, with buffs to the aesthete culture's ability. That thing is now an absolute powerhouse. You'll see me use it a couple of times in this footage. They did release one more screenshot of these war support changes and how they are sort of playing out in practice. This one is maybe the most interesting of the three, although they did all give us some good detail and thankfully in high resolution this time. Here you can see a fight where I've lost 4 units and the opponent lost none. Despite me being the aggressor, I'm assuming, in this conflict, I lost war support because I lost units. This fundamentally makes sense. A practical shift, building on what I've already discussed. It's just logical. And finally, maybe it fixes that issue of sort of gamifying war support. If you see an opponent's scout and you've got 3 units nearby, you can run out and fight it to quickly get an extra 10. And that might allow you to prolong the war a little bit longer. Again, another thing that should be being adjusted in this update by making changes to that voluntary forced surrender mechanic. In the last part of this video, I want to share a little bit of my own thoughts and feedback and some of the discussions that I've had with people around this update so far. I think that this should really help the overall war support, surrender, combat system in Humankind, and it looks like a really positive change. A couple of things I'd like to note, though, that maybe aren't quite being included or things that we might want to think about moving forward. Firstly, I don't see any suggestion yet of things like being able to free vassals in war support negotiation. Liberating cities or mechanics like that as well, building on that, I think could have a much better role in a war support system that seems to fundamentally still have its roots as it has the whole time. But along top, they're adding layers here of, like I said at the start, almost a sort of a loyalty mechanic through culture. Your troops now, really, their lives arguably matter a bit more as well through war support and the pillaging of districts. Another thing that could potentially be a bit difficult. I mean, how are we drawing the lines here? Ransacking enemy districts will now cost the enemy war support. That might make sense if you're destroying their military districts, but does it make sense if you're burning down farms in the middle of nowhere? Maybe it does, but maybe it doesn't. It would certainly weaken an opponent's force, but what would it do to their morale? The morale of the people and the nation? I think there are some difficulties potentially around the edges of this system, and it could potentially prove to be a little bit of a challenge to get it right. I'll be interested to see how they push this through in the Bolivar update, an update that we don't yet have an announcement window for. I will keep you updated. I'm closely following this news alongside, of course, Dune Spice Wars, the wonderful new real-time 4X strategy game that I've been playing a lot of. But don't worry, Humankind isn't going anywhere, although it would be fair to say it has an ever larger roster of wonderful games to compete with. And I think that's only a good thing. And it looks like Humankind is also making progress towards adding more new good things with this update as well. Do let me know if there's anything I haven't considered or you've got any other thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.